Full Self-Driving 12.4 has finally arrived, which is supposed to be a 5 to 10 times improvement in interventions per mile compared to 12.3, but I can tell you that is not currently the case. At least, not in the way you or I think about interventions, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I usually start off with the positives on my initial impressions videos, but this time we're going to start off with the negatives because there is one pretty glaring issue on this particular version. The first thing I noticed, and by far the biggest issue, is that this version cannot decide which lane it wants to be in. Take this merge for example. It's a merge that I go through very often, which 12.3 handled flawlessly every time, but 12.4 needlessly changes lanes over and over and over, even into the merging lane, and then goes back over, as you can see, which is extremely frustrating. And that lane change into a merging lane isn't a one-off issue. Here you can see it happen again with traffic around, which confuses the car who's supposed to be merging in behind us, so they decide to pass us instead. I don't blame the driver of that car at all and probably would have done the exact same thing. And I wish I could tell you this behavior only happens around merges, but for me it happens everywhere. Anytime I'm driving in an area where the car has more than one option of what lane it wants to be in, it immediately stresses me out because I know it's about to switch back and forth between them wildly. Most of the time I'm disengaging now is due to sheer embarrassment from traffic around who probably thinks I must be losing my mind. I've mentioned before that with the release of version 12, the car has been driving in such a way where I bet that not a single person around knows that I'm not actually the one driving the car, but unfortunately, this update seems to have undone all of that. And I think it's important to point out that I seem to actually be the only person in early access reporting this issue, which means it very well could be isolated to my specific car, but I do feel like I have to tell you about it. There's also been an increase in what I'm going to call derp moments. The car seems to get stuck in some really super random situations, like here for example, where we're making a right turn at this red light, but even after our lights turn green, and the car knows it's turned green, as you can see in the visualizations, it doesn't proceed and just sits here slowly creeping into the intersection, and it's actually taking so long to proceed that the light switches back to red for us, which forces it to yield to traffic coming from the left again, and then it only proceeds after the car has passed. And a similar situation happening on this next clip where even though our light turns green and we have the right of way, we appear to be waiting for the car across the street from us. This one was a little bit more forgivable because it is a pretty odd intersection, but I can't remember a single time of something like this happening on version 12.3. 12.4 sometimes seems to have a bit of a mind of its own. You can see it turn on the right turn signal here and start to slow down for a right turn and then goes nope and continues along our navigation route, which is straight ahead. This actually isn't the only time this happened. This has happened a few times now. It kind of feels like it's taking navigation routes as much more of a suggestion and just kind of doing its own thing. But by far, the derpiest thing I've seen from Full Self-Driving in a long time happens right around this corner. You can see this Model 3 pulling out wide so that they can back into the supercharger stall, and for some reason, we just stop directly behind him. And while the issues I just showed you may have shaken the foundation of your faith in the next version of Full Self-Driving, don't worry, because in reality, 12.4 is a sleeping giant just waiting to be awoken. This next clip shows an area that was a critical disengagement every time on version 12.3. Watch what it does when it realizes it's in the wrong lane here. Even at nearly 45 miles an hour, it hits the brakes hard and does the legal thing, which is continuing through the right turn. The reason this is so impressive is because this used to be a one-lane road and recently it's been expanded and repainted. So this lane is brand new and there's not much indication that it's a right turn only lane until it's too late. 12.3 never reacted to this soon enough and I needed to take over every time. And after being forced to turn right into this neighborhood that's still under construction, you can see the navigation path update to kind of make a U-turn in this court ahead of us. But in typical 12.4 style, it completely ignores that route and just kind of does its own thing like usual. And there were other times where I purposely forced it into a really difficult situation. You can see I have a right turn on the navigation path, but I have the car all the way into the left-hand lane here. From my experience, 12.3 would do its best to try to get over to the right-hand side of this road the best that it can, but you can see 12.4 even turns on the signal and completely ignores that navigation route and does the proper thing. Not that 12.3 wasn't capable of moves like this, it's just that 12.4 is very consistent about it. It really feels like it knows what it's doing, at least until it has more than one lane that it can choose from. But beyond that, it is doing many things way better than it ever has done before. Take this U-turn at the end of the court, for example. It can now turn the steering wheel all the way to the fully locked position, and it also starts accelerating even before it's completed the turn, which feels a lot more natural and human-like. It also seems to be able to predict human driving behavior a lot better. So take this next example where the person in front of us does not get far enough over in their lane, but it knows that they're turning left and doesn't even slow down as it passes them. The more I use version 12.4, the more moments that happen where I'm like, wow, that is absolutely the best that it has ever handled that. As the light turns green here, the vast majority of human drivers would just continue into the intersection and wait for a gap to go, but that is actually not the legal thing to do. The legal thing to do is not to proceed until you can see a gap that you're going to go for, which is exactly what full self-driving does here. Then, only after it sees a gap in traffic in the distance, does it slowly proceed into the intersection and get ready to make its move. This was handled very comfortably and also obeying all laws to a T, which seems to be a pretty common pattern in 12.4. The creeping for visibility to the actual commit is also handled a lot more smoothly in my opinion. There's very few times it comes to a secondary stop in situations like this, and usually just proceeds right on through intersections. There also appears to be a big focus on pedestrian safety in this update, a little too much sometimes. You can see this person walking to the back of their car, and we're slowing down a lot here just to make sure he doesn't take another step into the road. I can guarantee 12.3 wouldn't have reacted to that at all. It appears to be reacting to way more things that it didn't used to react to, which I kind of have to get used to. There's times where I'm like, why the heck did it just slow down randomly here? And then I'll go back and look and, oh, it turns out there was a car with hazards on parked off to the side of the road. I've gotten so used to what 12.3 reacts to and doesn't react to that I kind of have to fundamentally shift what I'm expecting out of full self-driving. You can see it seems very hesitant to proceed through this intersection, and I didn't understand why until a scooter showed up to the right, and as soon as they give us a wave, the car proceeds. Again, just reacting to things way off in the distance that it never would have before. I've only been using this version for a few days, but I've already found so many examples of it reacting to things that I did not see at all. These pedestrians crossing the street had been standing there for quite a while and were passed up by many humans who I bet also did not see them. And the way that it keeps reacting to these situations that I didn't even notice when I was sitting behind the wheel makes me really believe that 12.4 could be a giant step ahead of 12.3, at least until it gets to a multiple lane road. Then, not quite as much. Another very welcome improvement is that it seems to be doing a much better job at not cutting corners too tightly. You can see this curb off to our right has a lot of tire marks on it from people who cut this corner too tightly, but it waits until it completely passes it with both wheels to make the turn. Even in areas that are extremely tight like this parking lot, it does a really good job at staying very far away from all the curbs. I know we've seen some videos of 12.3 cutting corners too closely and hitting some curbs, but I feel pretty confident in saying that I think with 12.4, those issues are going to be completely resolved. I also did have a situation where you can see this police officer starts pulling over this car that's in front of us, and for the first time ever, it actually slows down before passing him, seeming like it's actually treating him differently because he has his lights on. It also does make a lane change to the right-hand side of the road when he was still behind us before he pulled into the parking lot, but it is really hard to say whether it was yielding for him or it was just changing lanes wildly, which has been such a pattern in 12.4. Here you can see some trash in the road that doesn't appear to be visualized in the autopilot visualizations, but interestingly, after it goes out of view from the cameras, it then starts controlling for it and goes around it. I posted this clip on X asking people if they thought this was a fluke or it actually remembers, and Elon responded saying it actually remembers, which is a huge deal. 12.3 definitely lost track of objects as soon as it was out of view of the cameras, so it being able to remember is a huge step forward. So in my opinion, there might be a 5 to 10x improvement under the hood of this software, but it's not happening in a way that anybody expected. You really only get to see version 12.4's true potential when you really push the system to its absolute limits and it's forced into a decision. And 12.4 is making the right decision much more often in these critical moments compared to 12.3. I think this is likely where that 5 to 10x improvement statement came from. I imagine that Tesla has a giant database of really difficult driving situations where in practice 12.4 really is that much better than 12.3 and doesn't require an intervention when 12.3 definitely would have. And I know what we were expecting was 12.3 levels of polish and smoothness with a 5 to 10x improvement in interventions, and that's not what we're currently seeing. But keep in mind, this is the first complete model retrain since we got version 12, and I remember being pretty concerned about some of the regressions I was seeing, even compared to version 11. But after a few months of updates, they were pretty much all resolved. I imagine a similar situation is going to happen here, where after they give it a few polish updates, it probably will be dramatically better than 12.3. But that does also beg the question, how much effort should go into 12.4 if 12.5 is right around the corner, which is also a completely new model? And what about 12.6? I don't have the answer to that, but it's interesting to think about. And I can't finish this summary without letting you know that there's been another big improvement, which is to Vision Auto Park. If you remember my last full video on Auto Park, I remember saying that I wish the car would just shift faster because it comes to a full stop and sits there and kind of spins its wheels and takes multiple seconds. Well, that is no longer the case. You can see here as it shifts, it's actually not even coming to a full stop. Really impressive stuff. And I've also noticed a lot of improvements in regular parking spots where it's not taking multiple maneuvers in order to fit into the spot, and instead it's just doing it the first time. And really nice job with this parallel parking spot here. And the last thing, which is probably the most important part of this entire update, is that as long as the cabin camera has a clear view of your eyes, the steering wheel nag is completely removed. I cannot express how crazy this feels. It really makes the experience entirely different and makes me feel like a passenger supervising what the car is doing. And I gotta say, it really does feel like the future. But it's also massively overshadowed by some of the regressions I've shown you, especially with the wild lane changes, and it makes the entire experience feel a lot less magical. But none of the regressions I showed are technically critical disengagements. They are all for comfort and preference. So in summary, while 12.4 may indeed be a couple steps closer to an actual robotaxi than 12.3 was with the way it's handling split-second critical decision making, it probably went a few steps back as far as a driver assistance feature, at least on my particular car. Time will tell how quickly they can resolve these issues, especially when Elon says 12.5 is coming by the end of the month, which I can almost guarantee is not going to happen. Or maybe it will. Who knows at this point? And one last impressive move here by 12.4, where we get to our destination, which is off to our right, but it is completely full of cars. You can even see cars double parked off to our right. And instead of just stopping in the road like it usually would, it actually makes a U-turn here. And you can see the steering wheel go to full lock to make this U-turn and goes and finds a spot across the street to park at. Truly incredible stuff. Please let me know what you guys think about this comment. I'm really excited to hear what you guys have to say, and if I really am the only one having these crazy issues. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for supporting the channel. Until next time, everybody.